Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eirini STRATAKI, and I'm going to present the wine marketing strategies and experimental evidence from Greece. The study is separated in 5 units. The first unit concerns the objectives and exploratory questions of the study. The second part concerns the definitions and terminology that was used in the study. The third part includes materials and methods. The part number 4 includes results and discussion of the research. And finally, the last part includes conclusions and proposals for further research. The primary objective is to identify and display the role of packaging and price in determining consumers' perception in respect of the value of wine along with the interaction among them. The second objective of the research deals with the influence of perceived value in the consumer satisfaction level and preferences concerning the wine, of course. So, taking into account the objectives, the exploratory questions are the following two. The first one is how the factors price and packaging contribute to the perceived value of wine. And the second question concerns how the perceived value of wine affects the level of wine consumer satisfaction. The hypotheses that derive from the objective and from the questions are hypothesis number 1, the external features of quality, which are included in packaging, affect the perceived value of wine. The price of wine determines consumers' perception about the value of wine is the hypothesis number 2. The hypothesis number 3, the external features of quality, which are included in the packaging, affect the wine consumer's satisfaction. Hypothesis number 4, the perceived cost affects the wine consumer satisfaction. And number 5, wine consumer satisfaction is affected by the perceived value of wine, which stems from packaging and price. The second part refers to the definition and terminology that we used in our study. So, perceived value of wine. When we say perceived value of wine, we mean 3 elements: quality, packaging, and prices. Quality means the internal features of quality, that is to say, variety of grapes, procedure of vinification, maturation, and so on. The packaging concerns the external features of quality, the shape of the bottle, for example, the label, the information on the label, such as the appellation, the origin, the brand name. And the price refers to the perceived cost, which means the value for money. Consumer satisfaction refers to the elements that are related to the perceived value, along with the emotional context in which the usage of a product or a service takes place. So the variables that we are going to examine are the packaging, which means the external features of wine quality, the perceived cost, which is referred as a price, the perceived value of wine, and the consumer satisfaction, and of course the relation among them. The study was conducted by using the method of experiments, and pilot research predated the main research. During the pilot research, pre-experimental design was carried out. The purpose of the pilot research was to identify and control the extraneous variables. So we found the extraneous variables are the internal features of quality, the participants' involvement with wine. Some participants have low and some other participants have high involvement with wine. The accompanied service of wine tasting, for example, a description of a wine by a sommelier or a waiter. The influence of other participants' opinions and appraisals, and the context and the social occasion where the wine tasting takes place. So, the main research followed the pilot. Experimental project of double measurements with the participation of experimental and control group was implied. The members of the 2 groups were selected with the method of random sampling, and the experiment took place in tasting rooms of wine cellars that are located in the 4 most populous cities of Crete. 120 participants took place in the participants were in the experiment, and they were separated in two groups. 60 of them were in the experimental group and 60 of them were in control group. So each of the two samples tasted the same wine in two different wine tastings. After each wine tasting, the participants of the two groups had to fill an assessment questionnaire. But the members of treatment group didn't know that the wine of the first and of the second tasting was the same. So we start with the first wine tasting, and after 40 minutes, followed the second wine tasting. The wine that was used in the experiment was served during the second wine tasting from another bottle with different packaging style, and of course the given price was higher. The person who served the wine avoided to give descriptions or information about it, and the only information that was mentioned was the price, nothing else. The participants, also the members of the group, avoid to express publicly their opinions or to reveal their assessments. The dependent samplesty test was used in order to compare the experimental group means from both wine tastings and the control group means from both wine tastings. The independent samplesty test was used in order to compare the experimental and control group means from the first wine tasting and the experimental and control group means from the second wine tasting. And Pearson's error was used for measuring the correlation among the variables of the experiment. So, with regard to experimental group, the differences of means between the two tastings were statistically significant with regard to packaging and the perceived cost. The difference in means of perceived value and consumers' satisfaction was also significantly important. And we also noticed that was statistically important the difference between the means of internal quality. So there were statistically significant differences between the two wine tastings of the treatment group. On the contrary, the same wine tastings, there was not any important difference in the compared means of control group. As for the comparisons of the experimental and control group, in the first wine tasting, it was observed no differences in the means of the two groups, but in the second wine tasting, the researchers changed the variables of packaging and price and occurred the following results. For the packaging, the experimental group's mean is significantly higher than the control group's mean. For the price, the experimental group's mean is also significantly higher than the control group's mean. And we have to mention that without any interference from the researchers, the experimental group mean was significantly higher in the second wine tasting concerning the evaluation of internal quality, since the control group mean did not change significantly. We can see that the mean was 22.42 in experimental group, while in control group the mean was 12.92. For the perceived value, we also noticed that the difference in means between the two groups was also high, as well as in consumer satisfaction. So it results from the evidence that the relation of packaging with the perceived value and the consumer satisfaction is positive of moderate significance, since the relation of price with those two variables is stronger. We also noticed that packaging affected the notions of the experimental group about the organoleptic properties of wine. And while the direct influence of packaging in perceived value and consumer satisfaction is moderate, its indirect influence through the formation of perceived value is much stronger. The main conclusion of the study is that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. The combination of perceived cost and of packaging multiplies their impact, either the positive or the negative. So we also observe that packaging and price, when we're examined separately and isolated from other marketing elements, create specific expectations about wine, especially the packaging. The packaging affects subconsciously the assessment about the quality of wine even after its tasting. Further studies could be recommended with the aim of examining the impact of packaging in relation with the consumer's involvement with wine, because we don't know if the consumers with high involvement are affected differently comparing with consumers with low involvement. Also, we recommend further studies with the aim of comparing the effectiveness of employees who promote the wine with the effectiveness of packaging in purchase decision and in the assessment after the wine tasting, and with the aim of examining the loyalty of wine consumers, since it's not taken for granted that the satisfied customer is loyal too. Thank you very much for your attention.